I was a chief reporter for a big British Sunday newspaper, and if you had met me back then, you would have heard a very confident woman who thought she understood the world. I had spent years travelling, chasing stories, interviewing politicians, generals, and so-called experts. I thought I knew what Islam was. I thought I knew who the Taliban were. In my mind, Muslims were dangerous, the Taliban were monsters, and women under Islam were broken, voiceless victims. I didn't invent these ideas. I absorbed them through headlines, documentaries, political speeches, and endless newspaper columns. I thought I was well informed. In reality, I was deeply prejudiced, and I didn't even see it. On September 11th, 2001, I was in the newsroom in London. I remember people gathering around the television screens. At first, there was confusion. A plane had hit one of the Twin Towers in New York. Then we watched, live, as the second plane went in. The room went silent. I didn't cry. I didn't sit there in shock. My first reaction was, this is the story of the century. This is my job. I need to get to New York. Within hours, I was at Heathrow Airport, dictating copy to my editor on the phone, trying desperately to get a flight. By the time I got there, both towers had fallen. America had closed its airspace. Borders were sealed. For 4 days, I waited and argued and schemed, trying to get on any flight I could to the United States. Eventually, I got a ticket. I remember holding that boarding pass, feeling that mixture of dread and professional excitement you get when you know you're going into history. Just as I was heading toward the departure gate, my phone rang. It was my news editor. His voice was tense. "Change of plan," he said. "We don't want you in New York. We want you in Pakistan." I was furious. I had packed a suitcase for Manhattan. Smart suits, heels, city clothes. I had never been to Pakistan. For me, it was just a name at the edge of maps and war reports. "Why Pakistan?" I asked. He said, "Because the real story is going to unfold in Afghanistan, and Pakistan is your way in." I didn't like it. I didn't agree with it. But I was a reporter, and this was my job. I turned away from the gate, changed my ticket, and 12 hours later, I landed in Islamabad, dressed completely wrong for the place, and with no idea how much my life was about to change. Islamabad was hot, dusty, and tense. Journalists from all over the world were pouring in. Rumours were flying. America would bomb Afghanistan. The Taliban would be overthrown. Al-Qaeda would be hunted down. I wanted to get into Afghanistan itself, to see the evil regime with my own eyes. I applied for a visa. It was rejected. I applied again. Rejected. A third time. Rejected. The message was clear. They didn't want Western reporters wandering around their territory. So I did something reckless. With the help of 2 local guides, I decided to cross the border illegally. They brought me a burka. I'd written about them before as symbols of oppression, but I'd never worn one. When I put it over my head, my world shrank to a small mesh grill in front of my eyes. I could see the ground. I could just about see the feet of the man in front of me, and that was it. I joined a group of women in a wedding party, all in burqas, all silent, as we set off toward the Khyber Pass. The Khyber Pass is 33 miles of winding mountain road, steep cliffs, ancient stones, and the feeling of walking through history. This was the route of armies, invaders, empires. I wasn't an empire. I was a middle-aged British journalist in a borrowed burqa, sweating, stumbling, my heart pounding as we approached the Taliban checkpoint. In my mind, this was where the nightmare would begin. I imagined harsh voices, guns raised, women dragged away, men with black turbans and wild eyes shouting at us. But what actually happened was nothing. The taxi pulled up. The men in turbans glanced briefly inside. They saw a cluster of faceless women in blue fabric. And that was all. No one questioned me. No one searched me. I wasn't shouted at. I wasn't even really seen. Under that burka, I disappeared. Invisible. For a woman who had built her entire career on being noticed, on asking questions and making noise, that invisibility was shocking. I had expected hostility. What I got was indifference. The first crack appeared in my certainty. We crossed the border and headed toward Jalalabad, a city under Taliban control. I braced myself. Here, finally, I would see the brutality I had been writing about. I imagined terrified women scurrying in shadows, men with guns on every corner, constant violence in the air. Again, what I found was not what I had expected. The market streets were full of men. They were the ones shopping, bargaining, carrying bags. At first, I was puzzled. Where were the women? Then it slowly dawned on me. Under Taliban rules, women couldn't speak to male strangers, so the men did the shopping. In London, I knew plenty of men who would rather do anything than go to the supermarket. Here, the men did it without complaint, because that's how life was organised. I'm not saying I agreed with those rules. I didn't. I still don't. But in that moment, I realised something important. Not everything I had been told was as simple as evil and good. Some things were cultural, some were about poverty, some were about war. Life here was complicated, like it is anywhere else. Eventually, we left the city and went to a small village. When I say small, I mean it was literally smaller than a modern supermarket. Mud houses, dusty paths, children with enormous dark eyes. People stared at me. They knew a Westerner was among them just days before American bombs were expected to fall. At first, they were afraid. Helping someone like me could get them killed. Then something very Afghan happened. Hospitality took over. Within half an hour, I was being offered tea, a place to sit, food, conversation through a translator. Fear battled with kindness, and kindness won. A young woman came to speak with me. She was in her 20s, intelligent, intense. Before the Taliban took power, she had been training to be a doctor. The training centre had been shut down, not just for her, but for her brother too. He, like her, wanted to study medicine and help people, but the school had closed, officially for lack of funds. She was frustrated, angry, stuck in the village, feeling her talents wasting away. While we were talking, an older woman strode into the room. She was strong, upright, fierce. She looked me up and down, put her hands on her hips and said, with complete confidence, "You English and American women are pathetic. You can only have 1 or 2 children. Me, I can have 15. And when you run out of boy soldiers, I will be producing more. Let 1 American soldier come to my village, and I will fight him myself." This was not the image of a cowed, crushed Muslim woman that I had in my head. She was proud, combative, absolutely convinced of her own strength. My stereotypes were crashing into reality and falling apart one by one. Then we talked about September 11th. She said, "We are very sad about this mishap. But what does it have to do with us?" I was horrified. Mishap? 6,000 people dead, and she called it a mishap. In my mind, that sounded cold, heartless. But then I realised something. Under the Taliban, television was banned. These people had never seen the footage I had watched endlessly in London. They had not seen the planes hit, the people jumping, the towers falling again and again on 24-hour news. For them, it was an event someone had described in a sentence. They were not unfeeling, they were uninformed. "Why are you going to bomb us?" they asked. And in that moment, I had no good answer. Leaving Afghanistan was not as easy as entering it. On the way back, things went wrong. A donkey bolted, a camera fell where it shouldn't, And in the chaos, my identity as a Westerner was exposed at a Taliban checkpoint. Guns appeared. Voices rose. I was arrested. They took me to the intelligence headquarters in Jalalabad. In my mind, this was it. The dark place. This was where the electrodes would come out, where people disappeared and were never seen again. All my years of swallowing stories about medieval brutality and barbaric fanatics came rushing back. I was terrified. I was brought into a room and introduced to the local head of intelligence. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten me. He asked me to sit. In a calm voice, he asked me to write down my name, my passport number, my employer, the names of the people who had brought me in. Then he said, "We are about to eat. You must have some food." I refused. Stubbornly, stupidly, I said I would not eat until I could telephone my editor in London. So began a 10-day standoff. Every day, 3 times a day, they brought food. Bread, rice, stew, a jug of water, a bowl to wash my hands. They laid it out on a cloth on the floor of my small room, and every time I said no. I thought they were softening me up for something worse. They kept saying the same strange sentence in broken English. "You are our sister. You are our guest. We want you to be happy." I didn't believe them. I was waiting for the moment the mask would drop, when the violence would start. By the 3rd day, they called a doctor, not because I was sick, but because they were worried I wasn't eating. He examined me. Pulse, eyes, blood pressure. I had suffered from high blood pressure for years. "Your blood pressure is normal," he said. I laughed at him. "That's impossible. I'm in a Taliban prison. I'm terrified. How can it be normal?" But it was. For the first time in years, my blood pressure had settled. The worst threat they ever made was this: "If you don't tell us the truth, you will stay here for 20 years. I told them they would get sick of me long before I got sick of them. It became almost a running joke between us. This was not the nightmare I had imagined. It was something far more unsettling for me as a Western journalist. It was humane. On the 6th day, there was a knock at my door. I looked up and saw a man step inside, and immediately something in me reacted. He was a religious scholar, a maulana. He wore an ivory robe that hung to the floor, completely clean despite the dust everywhere. His beard was neat, his light brown eyes calm. He held prayer beads in his hand, moving them 2 at a time. But it wasn't his clothes or his beads that struck me. It was his face. There was a kind of inner light, a serenity I had never seen in any politician or general I'd ever interviewed. I didn't have words for it then. I just knew I was in the presence of someone different. He sat down and asked me, gently, "What is your religion?" I said, "Christian, Church of England." Then he asked, "And what do you think of Islam?" I launched into a polite speech, saying every nice thing I could think of, because I was afraid of insulting him. I talked about spirituality, devotion, charity, anything that sounded respectful. He listened quietly. When I finally ran out of words, he smiled slightly and said, "Islam is a beautiful religion." Then he asked me a question that made my heart race. "So, you would like to become a Muslim?" In that instant, I saw the trap. If I said yes, I would sound like a coward, changing my faith under pressure in a prison cell. If I said no, I would insult Islam in front of a religious scholar in a Taliban jail. Either answer felt dangerous. I paused, and then I said the only honest thing I could. "I cannot make such a life-changing decision while I am in prison, but if you let me go, I promise I will read the Quran and I will study Islam." He looked at me, really looked at me, as if he was weighing my words and my heart. Then he smiled, stood up, and walked out of the room. He didn't argue. He didn't pressure me. He just left. 20 minutes later, my translator burst into the room, excited, breathless. "You're going home," he said. just like that. They had believed my promise and were acting on it. The Taliban, whom I had been taught to regard as liars and monsters, kept their word. Now, it was my turn. I was released. I crossed back into Pakistan. I flew back to London. I walked into my comfortable home, turned on my television, and watched as American planes bombed Afghanistan. I saw news footage of villages being hit. Villages like the one I had slept in, eaten in, laughed in. One of them, smaller than a supermarket, was bombed 3 days in a row. I saw dust, smoke, bodies, grief. And I could no longer pretend that these were faceless people in a far-off land. I had sat with them. I had heard their voices. I had drunk their tea. I had promised one of their religious scholars that I would read his book. I joined the anti-war movement. I marched. I spoke out publicly against the bombing of Afghanistan and the invasion of Iraq. Colleagues thought I had gone soft, or mad, or both. But inside, something deeper was happening. In the quiet of my own home, I picked up the Quran. I didn't open it looking for God. I opened it as a journalist, as a skeptic, almost as a prosecutor. I wanted to see for myself this violent, oppressive book I had heard so much about. I expected to find page after page of hatred and blood. Instead, I found something else entirely. I found a book that began not with war, but with mercy. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. I found stories of prophets I already knew, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, told with a depth and clarity I had never encountered before. I found verses about justice, about caring for the poor, about controlling anger, about forgiving others. I found, to my shock, that the Quran spoke directly to my heart in a way no book ever had. For months I argued with it. I argued with myself. I read commentaries, met Muslims, asked endless questions. I thought about those 10 days in the Taliban prison, about men who had every reason to hate me, but who treated me as an honoured guest. I thought about the maulana's calm face as he said, "Islam is a beautiful religion." Slowly, painfully, my old certainties died. One day, I realised that I could no longer pretend I was just studying Islam. I believed in one God. I believed Muhammad was his messenger. I believed the Quran was not a book of hate, but a guide. I believed that the peace I had seen in that scholar's eyes was real, and I wanted it. So in a small room in London, far from war zones and newsrooms and front pages, I said the words that would change my life. I bear witness that there is no God but God, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. The woman who had gone to Afghanistan full of fear and prejudice, who had expected to find monsters and savages, who had thought she understood Islam from the outside, became a Muslim. Not because of an argument on television, not because of a political speech, but because of an unexpected mercy shown to her in a prison cell, and a book that spoke to her heart when she finally dared to open it.